I'd like to introduce next a conversation between Brian Deese, who's currently the Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget at the White House, and he's the incoming Senior Advisor to the President for Energy and Climate Policy. Prior to his current role at OMB, Brian served as Deputy Director at the National Economic Council, where he was instrumental in coordination, policy development on several key issues, including the automotive industry. Joining Brian today in the conversation is David Sandalow, the Inaugural Fellow at Columbia University's Center on Global Energy Policy, where his work focuses on U.S. and Chinese energy policies. Please join me in welcoming Brian and David. Hey guys, enjoy the conversation.
Thanks. Well, thanks, Cheryl. And congratulations to everybody at ARPA-E that pulled together an event like this. I know from experience that something this good doesn't happen unless a lot of people work very hard at it. I spent some time this weekend Googling the name Brian Deese. I don't want to embarrass Brian with all the effusive praise that I found in different press clippings about him, but Politico calls him one of the breakout stars of the West Wing. My favorite quote was from Larry Summers, who is not generally known as somebody who is easy to please. Larry says, quote, "Brian grasps both the economics and the politics about as quickly as anyone I've ever seen do this." I had the privilege of working with Brian during the first term. He is as quick a study as anybody I've ever seen. Really terrific instincts on all the issues that we're working on in this room, and it's great to have you here. Brian, let me just start with a straightforward question. Why'd you take this job? You already have a pretty good one.
Well, first of all, thank you, and thank you all for being here. It's a very exciting event, and I was thrilled to be a part of it. I've had an opportunity to have a number of very exciting jobs inside this administration. I started working in the National Economic Council during the heat of the financial crisis, and for the last 2 years have been working at the Office of Management and Budget, overseeing a broad array of fiscal policies, but focused in some substantial part on the clean energy portfolio. The principal reason why I wanted to move into this new role, working more closely with the President and his senior team and trying to drive the climate and energy agenda going forward, is that, simply put, the challenge of climate change is going to be the defining challenge of our time, of my generation and my children's generation. And the opportunity to be in a position to help translate the President's vision and his passion into concrete action over this next period was something that I'm very excited about. I'm very humbled to have an opportunity to contribute to an amazing team that's built up across the administration, including the folks here at ARPA-E, and I'm looking forward to getting to work.
Thank you for taking it on, Brian. So what are your priorities going to be going forward?
Well, what's good about where we are right now in the trajectory of the administration is that the President has been pretty clear both about the priority that he places on climate change and the transition to a clean energy economy, and about what we need to get done. So I think many of you are probably familiar with the climate action plan that the President put forward, but we've tried to lay out in pretty explicit terms the objectives that we want to achieve on mitigation, on resilience, and on working globally, all to try to get at this transition to a clean energy economy. And we've got ambitious objectives in each of those areas. And so my priority over the next over this next period is going to be to try to be aggressive and ambitious across all of those areas, but also disciplined on trying to make sure that, I think as we have over the last year or so, really measuring ourselves against concrete and tangible goals.
So last week you put out, the President put out the Fy16 budget. I'm sure you were very involved with that. Could you just say a word about the energy and climate investments in the President's budget proposal?
Sure, and we're very excited about this budget because it, I think, provides a roadmap in pretty specific terms about how to support that three-pronged agenda that we talked about. So if you look at mitigation, you've got $7.4 billion of investment in clean energy technologies. That includes a 16% increase in the budget for ARPA-E, for example, trying to invest in technologies that we have seen and that you all have seen today are helping change the game, whether it's in battery research or solar technology or otherwise. There are a number of other pieces of the budget that are really important to that mitigation sphere as well. Things like a permanent extension of the production tax credit and investment tax credit to try to provide some certainty on the investment horizon for renewable investments. And also, there are places in the budget where we've tried to put new ideas on the field. So for example, EPA is working to finalize the Clean Power Plant rule, which it will do this summer. One of the things that we proposed in the budget was to say, for states that want to go beyond where the Clean Power Plant rule lands, they want to do more to invest in renewables, in efficiency, to go beyond the targets that are set, create an incentive fund to give them the more resources and more tools to invest to try to beat those odds. So we're very excited about some of the proposals like that. The budget also goes all in on the resilience work that we've tried to tee up. And the president ran this task force of state and local officials, tribal officials, to try to really get ideas from close to the ground on communities about how, in tangible terms, we can do resilience better. We're running a national competition right now, Rebuild by Design, that's trying to unearth creative ideas from individual communities across the country. And the budget tries to double down in areas where we know things are working, from coastal resilience to floodplain mapping and otherwise. And finally, in the international sphere, this is going to be a big year for climate issues internationally. And the budget tries to put the resources we're going to need against that. $1.29 billion in investment in the international space. And I would highlight the Green Climate Fund that we committed to at the end of last year that will provide resources to help this transformation happen all across the world, outside of our borders, but in ways that will actually redound back to the benefit of both our companies and our economy.
Just to stick with climate for a minute, Brian, your background is mainly in the economic policy area. Could you just say a word about the economics of climate change, the costs of action and inaction?
Sure. So when I come at this from an economic perspective, I think about it both in terms of opportunities and risk. I think one of the great opportunities we have is that we're seeing a real-life experiment that if we get the incentives right, that driving toward a clean energy economy and achieving the middle-class economic vision that the president laid out in the State of the Union this year don't actually have to be in conflict. In fact, they're totally in concert. And we've seen that, we've known that to be historically true, but we're seeing that in the last several years as well. It's a striking thing that we're going through an energy transformation in our country where for the first time we're actually reducing greenhouse gas emissions at the same time that we're seeing historic increases in the production of energy, both renewable and traditional fossil fuel. That is the opportunity embedded in those two things happening at the same time, I think, creates real excitement that we need to harness. And it's about setting the right incentives, investing in places where the federal government is uniquely capable of doing, and also being aggressive about providing a regulatory structure whereby people will have the incentive to invest years into the future. On the other side of the risks, and what is clear from an economic perspective, is that we face fiscal and economic risks from climate change that are real and immediate and that we're starting to see play out. But we also face tail risks and risks in the future that from an economist's perspective, when you have a very high likelihood, a very low likelihood outcome, but with extraordinarily high costs, you want to try to look to mitigate that. And what we have with climate change is real live impacts now, as well as those tail risks out in the future. One of the things we did in this budget for the first time was we included a standalone chapter on the the fiscal consequences and the fiscal impacts of climate change. And we did that in part because the evidence is mounting that if unchecked, that climate change will not only have devastating impacts on the planet, but it will also impose substantial costs to the federal government. And we should recognize those as part of our calculus as we're thinking about policies going forward.
And what types of costs are those?
Well, they're across the board. So, for example, we've seen substantial increase in draws on the National Flood Insurance Program, where the federal government provides insurance in certain areas that are likely, that have a high risk of flooding. And the increased incidence of flooding and the increase in the costs associated with major storms, obviously punctuated by Hurricane Sandy, but overall, is a cost that ultimately the federal government is bearing, and the federal government will bear in much higher degree if we don't see a change in the climate. Wildfires is another example, where if you look at the trajectory of federal spending on fighting wildfires, it's just going straight up. We're not well suited to budget for those issues, so it creates an annual crisis where we have to rob from longer-term investments in mitigation and forest preservation in order to fight fires. But one thing that's clear is that trajectory is going up, and it's not going to stop.
I want to ask you for a minute about the U.S. auto industry, because you were very involved in 2009 in the rescue of the auto industry. And how does that look now? How's that going from your perspective?
Well, I can say candidly that when we were in the winter and early spring of 2009, when the financial system and the auto industry were both on the brink of collapse, even in my most optimistic scenarios, I did not project that we would be where we are today. Just the last jobs report that we got this last Friday confirmed that we have now seen since June of 2009, when General Motors emerged from bankruptcy, we've seen the strongest period of job growth in the American auto industry on record. And I think that is a function of a number of things. One is that I think the president made a set of hard decisions during the heat of the crisis to try to stand behind the auto industry and give the individual companies a chance to succeed. But at the end of the day, what's happened is these companies have made some smart decisions. They're making smart investments, and they are growing their market share. And another thing that I think is really heartening if you look at the industry is over the last couple of years, the Detroit Three have actually increased their share of sales in the U.S. market. And that hadn't happened for decades before this crisis. And I think it's a signal that the companies are producing products that the American people want and are doing it in smart ways.
The president has focused a lot on fuel efficiency with your help in the past 6 years. Now, oil prices are down, gasoline prices are down, oil imports are down. Does that mean that fuel efficiency is less of a priority in your view?
Absolutely not. I think in some senses, the price of oil, the price of commodities fluctuates a lot. When we're trying to set policy, you do want to take one step back and ask what are the incentives that you want to have in place over the long term. And the drop in oil prices that we've seen recently, our estimation is consistent with most outside analysis that this is a net positive for the American economy, and that it is putting hundreds of dollars a year, or it will put hundreds of dollars a year in the pocket of a typical family, and that is a good thing. But I also think that we need to be cognizant of the fact that the price of oil is likely to go back up, and that over the long term, we should be focused on the incentives that we want to have in place. You talked about fuel economy. I think it's even more important in the sense that the fuel economy standards that we put in place in 2009, because those are there today, in addition to the savings that people are deriving at the pump from the recent decline in oil prices, somebody who's buying a new car today is going to save a couple $100 a year because of the increased fuel economy, independent of fuel prices. Now, obviously, there's an interaction, but that savings will endure, and it will grow because between now and 2025, fuel economy standards are going to double. And I think that that kind of long-term incentive and the certainty for companies to operate and make investments against that sort of long-term incentive is absolutely crucial and will continue to be going forward.
So in our final few minutes, I want to circle back to energy innovation, because we're here at the ARPA-E Summit, and ask you about energy innovation. Why is it important? And can talk about specifically what the administration is doing beyond the ARPA-E front on the energy innovation topic.
Yeah. Well, look, I think that ARPA-E has been a great success in showing what the federal government can do to try to help lay the groundwork for clean energy innovation across the economy. And as many of you all are out there innovating, and as we're seeing in the real life examples, the power of the federal government investing in that basic level of fundamental research, taking risks, and then looking for ways to spread that innovation is incredibly important. So we're going to keep looking for ways to leverage the assets that we have in the federal government to expand the playing field and try to drive innovation across the economy. One of the ways to do that is to keep resourcing ARPA-E, and that, the 16% increase in the budget. There's bipartisan support for ARPA-E, and we're very gratified to see that, want to work to do that. But we're going to look to other places as well. So for example, today we're announcing a clean energy investment initiative. We're going to set a goal of trying to attract $2 billion of mission-oriented and philanthropic investment to try to address what's often referred to as the valley of death, the early stage investments and different structures that are in between basic research and market-ready investments. So we've got we have some core outside partners who have made commitments already. The University of California Regents have committed to invest $1 billion of their endowment in these types of new and innovative models. We've got the Schmidt Family Foundation, the Hewlett Foundation, and Wells Fargo all making initial commitments. And what we're going to try to do, led by the Department of Energy, is to hold a summit later this spring where we're going to try to bring together additional actors in this space to make commitments as well. And the Department of Energy will leverage the technical expertise and know-how that it has to try to help encourage more and better investment in this space. So that's an initiative we're very excited about. We're launching it today in the context of this summit. And we're going to keep looking for other ways. That is a way that doesn't involve additional appropriated funds, but uses the convening power and the technical know-how of the Department of Energy, which you know well, to try to encourage more investment in this space. We're going to look for more ways to do that, more ways to invest federal dollars wisely, anything we can between now and the end of this administration.
Well, Brian, thank you very much for taking on this challenge. Would you please join me in giving Brian Deese a big hand?
Thank you.
Hey, you guys, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.